and welcome. We're here this afternoon in the Anthony Hay Cabinet Shop in the harpsichord corner. I'm Melanie Belongia, apprentice harpsichord maker. I've been here in the shop for about 3 years, learning the trade from lead harpsichord maker Ed Wright, who couldn't be here with us today, but you'll still get to see in some of our behind-the-scenes footage over in collections. We'll be talking this afternoon a little bit about the 1726 Cotton Aston original that we've got in the collection here, and the 3 instruments that we've been working on over the last several years. So surrounding me here right now, we've got the 2015 instrument that Ed worked on mostly solo, and then the 2019 instrument that is currently lidless, though it does have its lid and is fully playable. The foundry is very graciously doing the brassware for us for that instrument, and then it will be looking for a home. So if you know of anyone looking for a harpsichord, let us know. And then to my left is the instrument we have currently underway. And I think we can take you into collections now to have an introduction to the 1726 instrument that we based these on. Hello, and welcome to the Bruton Heights Wallace Collections Laboratory here in Colonial Williamsburg. We are the harpsichord makers in the Anthony Hay Cabinet Shop. I'm Melanie Belongia, apprentice harpsichord maker.
And I'm Edward Wright. I'm the journeyman harpsichord maker. So let's start first by introducing the instrument as an instrument. And so...
Got that nice lid stick there.
And there is actually a slot on the lid for the lid stick to stay so that we do not have an accident. So the instrument itself is 1726, made by Cotton Aston. And we have, let's see, there are surviving, 2 of his instruments made as a solo builder surviving to us. This one that we have here at Colonial Williamsburg, and another one which is in a private collection in England. So Cotton Aston, we know a fair amount about him by some recent research. In 1726, we know he was 48 years old. It was a bit of a tragic year for him because he lost 2 of his sons at very, very young ages. The instrument was made, we also know that he was living in Queen Street, just north of Piccadilly. And we've been able to locate at least the general location of where his shop and home was located. We also know that he was not alone when this instrument was built. We have information just recently discovered that at this point he had 2 apprentices. A young man by the name of Richard Fenn, same last name, interestingly enough, as Aston's wife, Amathia Fenn, that was her maiden name, but we don't know what the relationship between them might have been. The other one was a William Knott, who had just begun his apprenticeship the previous year. William Knott unfortunately died a couple of years later, but Richard Fenn, who was the senior apprentice, did complete his apprenticeship, and we do have the record of him gaining his freedom and also freedom of the city of London. So that's kind of the background history for this instrument and where it came from and the circumstances surrounding its building.
We're back here with our 3 replicas after you've had a look at the original there. Maybe I should take just a second and explain that harpsichords are a plucked keyboard instrument and just play a few notes. So you can hear just a few there. And these spinits, this smaller model here, was something that was very popular, specifically in the home during this period. This 2015 instrument that's right here beside me is Ed's first sort of solo look into reproducing this cotton Aston instrument. And in doing so, he took a little bit of time to kind of experiment with and focus on the acoustics and mechanics of the instrument, and therefore to still get one out in a timely sort of fashion, decided to take a few liberties with making slightly simpler but still ornate decoration in terms of the veneer work. For example, the name board here in front, which we'll talk about in just a little bit too, still very ornate, but you've probably noticed deviates a little from the original. Also the keys here with just ebony for the accidentals and the arcades being a little different. So with each of these instruments, we'll see subtle variations there as we go. The 2019 instrument kind of carried on a little bit with those same acoustic sort of ideas in mind and experimenting a little bit more with those, and keeping the veneers still a little bit on the simpler side of things. We've gone ahead and incorporated the skunk tail accidentals, those black and white for the chromatic keys there, and started pulling a little closer to the original in terms of those. And then really with the third instrument that we have underway currently, on my left here, we've really started focusing and honing in a little bit more about staying a little more faithful to the decor and the overall look and feel of the original instrument. So I think we'll go back to collections real quick to show you some of the veneer and decor on that instrument.
So let's start with the first thing that is going to be the eye grabber for anybody who would see this instrument, and that's the decoration work that's over the name board, and also lovely done around the interior of the instrument. So let me pull out the name board, and this is a very, very typical type of assembly on these early instruments, that these name boards just are removed. That's mainly so that way you can service the instrument and take the keyboard out. But it was very typical to see these instruments decorated in this very contrived manner. It becomes really the core look of English harpsichords from early in the 1700s until pretty much the end of British harpsichord making in the 1790s. So with this, we have a piece of boxwood in the center with the inscription written in ink and probably done by a professional calligrapher. That's surrounded by probably either holly or boxwood, and probably holly dyed black, which had been built around it. And then we have walnut, which has been glued up in order to create a kind of chevron, or what is sometimes termed a feather pattern. And then that's been built as a final outer border. Then we come outside of that, and all of this beautiful walnut, this is cut from the stump area of the tree. So the pieces are small, and consequently, Aston, or whoever was doing the decoration work under his direction, they had to piece up small sections, and they had to think about that in ways so that way it could be easily done. The seams show now, of course, a little bit more greatly because the instrument, of course, is as old as it is. But even at that time, a couple of pieces here, for example, glued together, seam runs down the middle, and you get that spear point, or maybe even to simulate a Gothic arch effect. So using veneers to create those kinds of contrived decorations, very, very typical. You can see it on furniture of the 1600s and into the early 1700s, and definitely something that was just absolutely part of the character of these English harpsichords. So, but then the decoration also gets repeated a lot on the inside.
That's true. So all the way around the spine of the instrument, even on the back of the name board, and here on the jack rail, which we'll pull out there, just to be able to show you a little bit of those patterns. It really mirrors what Ed was talking about there on the name board as well. We've got that same center section of that stump figured walnut, again built up in little sections, and that same chevron pattern running there, and cross banding around the outside, all out of walnut, but with those different cuts. You really still end up with a really lovely pattern that gives enough contrast to where you have a nice decorative effect. So I hope you've enjoyed that look at some of the veneer decor and the original instrument. As we're going forward with the current instrument that we have underway, one of the things we should probably mention is accessibility to some of the things that our historic counterparts would have been able to just acquire commercially. And some of that veneer decor is exactly that. So there were veneer sawyers during the period, and I think we've got a plate by Roubaud that we can put up on the screen and show you a little bit of what their work looked like for Ed and myself, and for our cabinet makers as well. Whenever we do veneer work here in the shop, we have to make it ourselves in order to be able to recreate this. So that's going to add a little bit to the time and the working hours that are going into this current instrument here. And we can show you too, Ed and myself sawing out some of that veneer. I think we've had that up on the screen for you. And we can also give you a little bit of a close-up of some of that veneer decor on this current instrument. I've just got some mineral spirits here behind me that I'm going to kind of mop onto the surface here and hopefully bring that up a little bit just so it pops for you, so you can hopefully see a little bit of that decor there, all that nice walnut, just in those different cuts, that nice figured stuff here in the middle with that chevron pattern going around, and then some cross banding on the outsides there. So that's really going to have a nice effect here over that blonde of the soundboard, and keeping a little bit closer to the original instrument in this case. A couple of the next things coming up will be to do the name board for this instrument and the jack rail, which will closely mirror the original as well. So on the name board on the 2015 instrument, here in the middle, Ed kept close to the original and still kept some of those really nice ornate decorative elements that you like to see around the key well. And that's where the player's spending the bulk of their time. It's nice for it to look good for them too. So you have this nice effect here with this really figured walnut that he's chosen, and then here on the cartouche, that flamed maple really pops and also accents the flamed maple banding there quite nicely. One of the things in looking at the original instrument that can be really nice for us is we see tool marks, and they can help inform how our process in recreating these things should look too. So I think we've got a picture of the back of the name board from the original instrument there that shows some of those toothed marks kind of nicely for us. Let me show you that, and I can show you the toothing plane itself and what it looks like. A lot of times we'll pull the blade out, like I've done here from another one of these planes, just to scratch the surface on the substrate and on the back of the veneer itself. It really aids when we're gluing that really thin membrane down, a little more surface area for the glue to kind of bite too. So that's a little bit of a look at some of the decor on the instrument. So now let's have a look at some of the mechanics and how these things work. So we have a little bit of footage from the original instrument there, talking a little bit about the keyboard and the jacks and that instrument.
So we've taken the front name board out. The jacks that do the plucking on the inside have been removed. And now we can take the keyboard out, and all of this has been designed for servicing. So let's service this instrument just a bit.
So there's end blocks on either side of the keyboard that Ed's able to grab there to start pulling out the entire key well, which supports all of the key levers here and allows it to really stay in place while it's in the instrument. We're going to just show you a few of the individual keys as we remove those here.
Originally, this keyboard started as a board, several boards glued up. The part of the key that you play is drawn from a template. The rest of the length is adjusted to fit the alignment with the jacks on the inside. The levers are made of spruce, and then they're covered with thin sheets of bone in the case of this natural that I've picked out. Also, because the keys tend to be front heavy, they're very heavy in the front, and if we just left it as just a solid board, they would always fall forward, and that's what we don't want. So it's very, very typical to add lead weights on the inside end of the lever, really to do two things. Number one, so that the keys will retract into their proper rest positions, and also to adjust the placement and the size of the leads so that the keys will work consistently under the player's fingers. You don't want some of them being heavier under the touch or lighter under the touch. So that's a very subtle way of being able to regulate the behavior just of these levers. Now, also, this instrument is a bit distinctive on the decoration side because not of the naturals, but of the accidentals. Yeah, if you can grab one there. There you go.
Sure.
Yeah.
So if you're used to a modern keyboard, you're quite likely used to seeing a black key for the accidental key here. And these are built up over the surface of that key lever instead of just being that thin veneer like the ivory keys on this instrument. Cotton Aston, though, went with something a little bit different and something you see sometimes on early 1700s English instruments like this. It's a sandwich effect with ebony, that nice black wood on the outside, and a slip of ivory down the center instead. And these are kind of neat for us to be able to look at the original of too, because sometimes we can still see remnants of tool marks, whether it's little file marks at the back end of the key or toothed plane marks across the side of the ivory that's still very exposed on the finished project there. So yeah, those are the accidentals there, and I might turn it back over to you to show us the action in the back.
Yeah, one other issue you're dealing with the keyboards is that you want the keys to have their straight seesaw action to operate properly, but you don't want them moving side to side and rubbing against each other. So the back ends of the keys have been cut into forks, two-tine fork, two prongs. And then I'm going to set this back in, and we can turn this entire keyboard around, and you can see a rack of pins, and the forks in the ends of each lever. Each fork wraps around a pin, and that pin stops the lever from wanting to fishtail sideways. And so you've got good control over that function. You might have also noticed on the keys too, let me pull one out here again, these leather pads. The jacks are made out of wood and so are the keys, so you want to make certain that you're not going to have wood knocking on wood and making a much more extra noise. Really irritating. So padding just right where the jack is going to sit on the key. And as you can see with the one here that Melanie has, would sit just like that. And they'd be raised up in that manner.
Mm-hmm. So they'll pop up to slide through a register, a guide, and then pluck the string here with that little plectra. The jacks on this particular instrument are a little bit of interest to us because they're probably not from this instrument. Might still be from Cotton Aston's shop, just spare parts he had on hand from another instrument that could be cut down and customized to this one. We see interesting marks that show up on a number of these, some stamps that have different number indicators for keys that their written number isn't associated with, so, and weights that have been moved around too. So probable that these were in another instrument at some point too before they came to live and work in this one. But they've been tailored to this one at this point and work quite well. And that seems to be the big concern with this entire keyboard and its mechanics. You know, they knew where to place their focus and leave a little bit of tool marks where it didn't really matter so much, but still keeping all of that action working as intended. So that's a little bit of the keyboard mechanics for this instrument.
The full action.
Anything else to add?
As it's called. Nope, that's good.
So we're back, and I've pulled the keyboard, the entire key rack out of the current instrument, just so you can have a look at what we've been doing with this one, and how it's similar and how it differs, both from the original that you've just had a look at here. So just to pull a couple of these keys out real quick. So this is one of the naturals here. And so instead of ivory, like you might find on both the original or other period instruments, we've gone ahead and used bone here, which is something that was used during the period as well. Ivory wasn't always available, and when it was, it's an additional expense. So bone is a nice alternative and a good one for us because we can avoid any legal and ethical arguments for using ivory, even if we could. The other thing we've done on these keys is to mimic the arcade that we find on the original instrument as well. So this nice little sort of semicircle design that's cut into the front of this little plate that's on the key head there. I think we've got a short little video clip there of how we drill those out that we can show you real quick. And so like you saw in the little clip there, we end up getting a couple of those circles out of each one of these blanks that we'll drill out. And then we'll just cut those little circles in half. So I can actually get 4 out of one of these little blanks here, which with 61 keys, 5 octaves, I'm going to need a whole bunch of these. So that works out really well. With the chromatic keys, the accidentals that we've got here, it's built up on the surface of this lever with a sandwich of ebony, that dark black wood that's naturally this color, coming from the west coast of Africa. So again, another import for us, and a bone slip down the center there. So those are the keys themselves. One of the big differences on the back of this key wall here, I'll kind of turn this guy around here if I can. That's what these end blocks here are for. They make really good handy use of that if I remember to use them. So in the back here, you can see a couple of these keys bobbing up and down perhaps. I'll tilt it up a little too if that helps. So what we've noticed on the original there and showed you guys is that little fork at the back of the key. On these instead, we've left them a little more, well, stable and supportive. Largely because we're building these with the modern player in mind. Those little forks can be very fragile on the back end of those keys, and on a lot of those antique instruments, we end up seeing a lot of damage to those over time. And having these left with that full support in the back, we've still got pins on either side to prevent the key from fishtailing, but that provides a little bit more stability. The other thing that we've done here with the back of the key wall there is this over rail. So we've got pads of fabric that are built up under the surface of that rail turn it back around so you can actually see that a little bit. I don't think you can see it from that side. But that blue felted wool that's here, that's sewn into the top of this rail and then tacked into place with these tiniest of little tacks that were made by one of our blacksmiths, Ashlyn Lewis, for us here. So thanks to her for those. So that fabric and some of those components are missing from the original. So that's where we've kind of had to fill things in just by looking at some of those tool marks that were left there on the original and just a little bit of experience in looking at other antique instruments as well. So now that we've had a chance to look at some of the jack mechanisms on the original and the keyboard mechanics here, it might be a good time to ask if we've had any questions or comments.
Yeah, thanks, Melanie. We've got a few questions coming in. Maybe take one right now and then get to the others as they come in and as you wrap up the program. But from William, who's wondering, is it possible to have any sound adjustments, like a lute stop, for example, on a small spinit like this? And if you can maybe tell us, for those that don't know, what William means by this in addition to answering the question.
Sure. That's a very good question. And it is interesting, too. And for those who aren't familiar, a lute stop and any sort of special effects along that line are something we see more typically on full-sized harpsichords. One of the things about having a plucked keyboard instrument in general is that pluck that we saw with that jack post there, that quill is only going to pluck at one sort of strength. No matter how aggressively or gently I strike the key, I'm only going to get one sound out of it. So with some of the larger instruments, you'll see things like that lute stop that was being asked about, which is sort of a shortened plucking point, usually sounding an octave up. It's a little more nasal, and it will kind of color the sound a little bit more. A lot of times, especially on double manual, so 2 keyboard harpsichords, you might be able to play those in tandem and create a little more color, a little more fullness to the sound, or just kind of create a different effect with it. That is not something that we commonly see with these spinits. These smaller models are generally just a single manual, so just 1 keyboard and 1 set of strings. It's challenging enough to kind of squish everything into this kind of twisted sort of shape in the first place. So seeing things like a lute stop or a buff stop are a bit unusual. I won't say that it never happens. Folks always like to experiment, but it certainly wouldn't be the norm. So, and of course, if you guys watching have any other questions or comments, please leave them for us. And as we come back towards the end of the program, we'll be able to answer a few more of those for you, unless we have any others right now.
There's one now. I think it
sure.
would be a good time to answer Susie's question.
Okay.
She was wondering about bone. Is there any particular animal that the bone would have been coming from?
Sure, and that's something we do get asked very frequently, and I probably should have mentioned. But we're working with, generally speaking, bovine, so cow. It needs to be from a mammal that's got a large enough shin bone for us to be able to get slips that are going to be both thick enough, even though it's a very thin veneer, and long enough for our purpose. So it's typically going to be cow. Yeah, very good questions. So I think going forward, we can kind of move into some of the sound components of the instrument. So we've got a film, again, looking at the original there of the soundboard, and then we'll talk a little bit about the one we've got underway currently. And we're here to have a look at some of the crucial sound producing elements of this keyboard instrument. So we've got the soundboard, this blonde piece here, with the curved bridge running across, and the nut here in the front of the instrument. Those are such crucial components to the sound of an instrument and can provide a lot of insight when you're copying or reproducing an instrument as well. One of the big conundrums for us when looking at this instrument, though, is that in 1898, a very well-regarded and respected keyboard maker and restorer, Dolmetsch, replaced the soundboard during the restoration of this instrument. So we don't know whether he preserved Cotton Aston's original ideas and intent and layout and composition. So what's here has been very good and informative for us to go with. Still using Spruce for the soundboard, which is kind of the go-to for any wood-bodied acoustic instrument, and still very informative and a good resource for us, and a good look into what a lot of these antique instruments end up going through over the years to keep them a playable instrument, which first and foremost, that's our role as a musical instrument maker, is to make a tool for a musician and to keep it in good playable condition. So it becomes an interesting argument when you start looking at it as an artifact and then preserving and conserving the original maker's intent. You end up having to make that decision. When do you stop using this as an instrument and start using it for study and to keep it for future generations in that respect? This instrument is not set up as a playable one at this point, but it has been very valuable for us with the 3 instruments that we have reproduced in the shop, and will be a great tool for us going forward in that regard. So let's have a look at the current instrument that we've got underway and its soundboard here. So just laid on top so you can get an idea of where they're going to go. These 2 pieces of cherry here and here, the nut and the bridge for the instrument, kind of laid out generally where they're going to end up going, though they are still in progress. I'm just going to pull those out here so we can give you a good view of what this soundboard looks like. So for us, it's 4 pieces of European spruce that have been joined up and glued together with that hot animal hide glue that we use, and thickness to, let's see if I can get this guy out of here, under 1/8 of an inch. So it'll start off around 1/8 of an inch, and it becomes this very flexible, and I don't know if you can see that there, that bend, very flexible sort of membrane. And that's really kind of what we need, because even with the 3 support braces that will go on the underside of that, this is how we transmit the vibrations, the sound, into the cavity of the instrument. So this is really where the bulk of the sound is coming from. So even just choosing the grain orientation, in this case, running parallel to the spine, and that's what we've done on the other 2 instruments as well, which goes against what Dolmetsch chose to do with his reproduction soundboard there for the original instrument. But both were pretty common for spinits during this time. So for that 1726 period, you could kind of see either or in terms of that grain orientation. Typically on larger harpsichords, you'll see it running the way we've chosen to do, and we think that contributes overall to a really good sounding instrument. So that's what we've gone with here as well. So I think that's probably a good place for us to wrap things up. I did want to say thank you to John Watson, who was the former curator over at Collections, and Amanda Keller, who is the current curator, and her team over there, for allowing us to study and ask millions of questions and really dive into the original over there. And I guess we'll open things up if we've got any more questions or comments you guys wanted to ask.
Sure, and thank you, Melanie. You're talking just now about spruce for the soundboard. You talked quite a bit about walnut earlier for decorative purposes, but Patrick is wondering, I think he's kind of looking for a rundown of the different woods in this instrument and maybe some of the reasons behind using one wood over another.
Absolutely. Walnut is definitely one that we'll see a lot, especially on these English spinits during the time, kind of taking our cues a little bit from what's fashionable in terms of furniture, because that's largely a decorative component here. So those darker sorts of woods like that are going to be a little more desirable. We could do one out of mahogany as well. The big trouble when we run into the bent side for the instrument there with mahogany is that we would need to do the bent side out of oak and then veneer over it with mahogany, since that doesn't take the bend so well. So those are a couple of exterior sort of choices. A lot of different woods can go into the decor in terms of some of the inlay work or veneer decoration there. So things like that figured maple or boxwoods or holly will be some of the things we'll see. Things like the rest plank, which we didn't really talk about very much, that supportive board that sits in front of the register where the jacks live, typically out of a very strong, durable wood, sort of like beech. Things like the jacks themselves are often made out of a smooth sort of wood, like pear, which is what we use. It needs to be able to travel very smoothly through that register, and so that works quite well for that. Cherry is what we've gone with for the nut and the bridge on these instruments. That's something that you would have seen used in North American instruments as well. It has good tonal properties itself. It transmits those vibrations into that spruce soundboard. So a good choice in that regard. The spruce is really the biggest one in terms of sound. A lot of the other wood choices are either aesthetic or mechanical decisions. That helps. But probably close to 12 species end up going into one of these instruments altogether.
And so, is there a particular reason? What makes spruce so ideal for a soundboard? Susie was asking about this, and Doug is also asking, is there a particular wood or maybe type of wood that you wouldn't want to use for a soundboard?
Oh, goodness. So those are both really good questions. Spruce and its nice tonal properties largely comes from the grain orientation. So it tends to grow in northern climes that are quite cold. So it has these really regular growth patterns, which means we end up with very tight, regular grains. So that ends up allowing us to make the boards quite thin, which means that they're very flexible and will allow the sound vibrations to travel freely through them, which is exactly what we want. So using a really dense hardwood, the opposite of that, would maybe sound okay if you just put like a tuning fork on it. It would still resonate. You'd still be able to hear the pitch, for example. But we wouldn't be able to get thin enough for it to really allow the vibrations to travel freely through it. So things like ebony, which we use for its durability on the keys there, wouldn't work so well in terms of making a soundboard out of it, if that makes sense.
So who would own spinits like this? Robert, in particular, was wondering if poorer families would even have access to a spinit.
It's a good question. And while you could buy instruments like this secondhand, and that was a perfectly easy entry point and would make it a little more economical, that's not necessarily going to make it an achievable thing for everyone. It's sort of like today, it's that you can find, free pianos all over the place if you'll come and pick them up, but that's still not achievable for everyone. So typically these instruments would be seen more in upper middling and gentry sort of homes, maybe successful merchants. We know there were a number of them around town here, the Gettys, for example, the Carters, and if you visit our palace, you'll see full-size ones. So they're instruments that are very popular for home use and a good educational opportunity, usually for your young daughters, to sort of both improve their marriage prospects and their societal aspirations, but also to just for good socializing. It's really a nice way to be able to entertain in the evenings too. So probably not something that's going to be available to everyone, and for me working in a shop like this, it's probably not something that I would own, and for somebody who's working out in the field, probably not ever going to be something that you're going to study or interact with. So, yeah.
And so, talking about spinits and a little bit on the role just now they play in this 18th century world of Williamsburg, William is curious about clavichords.
Sure.
Are they around here?
So They're still an instrument that people would be familiar with, and keyboard players would still know, but it's not something that we're seeing show up quite as much. Spinits are going to be more popular in terms of everyday sort of use here, and we're already starting to see some early pianos showing up as well. So both of those have sort of overshadowed the clavichord at this point largely.
Erin is curious about the piano. Where and when does that, where does it come from and when does it really start to be a factor?
Sure, and there's a good bit of overlap there too. So the piano is invented around 1700 in Italy by Cristofori, and just like any new technology, it sort of takes a while for that instrument to evolve and to become desirable. People have to see it, and players have to start seeing the advantages that it presents and the potential there. Makers have to start, taking those players' needs and wants and composers' needs into consideration and start building for that. So there becomes this sort of consolidation of all those little evolutions, but that's really not going to happen until we get into the 1800s. So by around 1825, we see that cast iron frame being developed that allows us to really expand the compass of the instrument. We can put a whole lot more tension down on that soundboard. A wood-bodied instrument like these harpsichords just can't withstand that. So we start seeing things like Silverman introducing the sustain pedal, and you start seeing the more modern piano show up, but that's not going to be until well into the 19th century. We do see early pianos showing up even here in Colonial Williamsburg and in colonial America. It's still a desirable instrument. It's not just a novelty. The advantage to it is starting to be known. It's just going to take it a little while for it to gain the popularity to where it sort of overshadows these instruments.
So you're surrounded by these three beautiful instruments. Looked at the original, and they're all a little bit different. Could you tell us, as these are being made, what were some of the factors that influenced the changes, from the original?
Sure. Sometimes it can be as simple as time. That's not always on our side. Just from even when we have the luxury of not having anything but self-imposed deadlines, which is often the case. We still have to decide, okay, we've experimented with this thing enough. We need to have a finished product so we can see how those experiments play out. So sometimes it's as simple as that, just kind of imposing we've studied this enough, now let's kind of execute it and put it into action. Sometimes it's weighing two different things that we want to study, whether it's the soundboard and how we want to lay the bracing out on that, and if we want to experiment a little bit with the bridge and the string layout. Well, okay, that's going to take a little bit of time to study and to approach. So maybe we'll cut back on some of that veneer decoration here. So it ends up being this kind of juggling act with what do we want to prioritize here.
This current instrument with more veneer work on it and everything, and then just the nature of being a harpsichord, how long do you expect that will take to build?
So with these instruments, we've kind of been talking in the neighborhood of about 600 working hours. And that's been true for the 2015 and the 2019 instrument. With the increased attention to the veneer decor on the one that we're currently building, it's probably going to push closer to about 700 working hours. So all those little decorative elements kind of add up a little bit.
I think we have, speaking of time, I think we have time for one final question, which is at the end of that, hour 701, this harpsichord is done. It's on its way to its new home. What do you do next? Is it going to be another reproduction of the cotton ascent, or is it something different?
So it's definitely been nice to do several instruments on the same pattern after the same maker. It's given us a chance to really, really dive deep and study this. And I'm sure at some point we'll come back to this pattern too. But at the third one, we are already starting to talk about, well, this maker here and this instrument here, and this would be kind of nice to do. So we've got a couple of things that we're floating around, and who knows, maybe you'll come in one of these days and see us making a full-size harpsichord. You never know. So we've got those things keeping us busy, but one of the things at the forefront of our mind right now, we've got another apprentice joining us in just a few weeks. So that's pretty exciting news, and it's the first time there will be 3 harpsichord makers here in the corner. So we've been kind of cleaning up shop a little bit and getting tools ready for our new apprentice and making plans in that regard. And so they'll definitely have a say too in the next instrument that we look to approach as they start their study here.
Well, thank you so much, Melanie, and thank you, Ed, too. Thank you all for joining us today as well. This project was funded in part by a generous grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. And as always, this program was made possible by the generosity of our donors. Thank you. To learn how you can contribute to presentations like this, please follow the link pinned to the comments or join us at colonialwilliamsburg.org. Melanie, do you have any final thoughts to send us on our way today?
Just 2 quick things, if I could. One, well, I guess 3. Thank you very much for joining us. Just for me, it's been nice being able to talk with you and answer so many wonderful questions. I hope you'll come and visit us in the shop sometime. And one thing that I wanted to mention about some of what Ed's been spending his time on here lately, he's been diving deep into both Cotton Aston and some of the other English spinit makers and their work in genealogy, but he's also preparing his research for a presentation on Edmund Dickinson, who was the 3rd master of this cabinet shop. And he'll be delivering that presentation in January at our 24th annual Working Wood in the 18th Century. So if you're interested in the furniture making end of things, or if you just want to come and see some of our woodworking trades and some experts in this field in action, have a look for January 20th through 23rd. That conference will be going on. So I hope we'll see you soon. Thank you.